We'll see in a minute. I'll wait for you guys to catch up. Sorry about this. We're a little delayed. OBS decided to crash, as it tends to sometimes. If you're familiar with it, it's the free streaming software. It's great when it works, terrible when it doesn't. With any luck, we're now live, but I'll give it a few minutes just to kind of like get up to speed and before I start talking, but I'll do a quick introduction about myself. So hi, my name is Oliver. I've been a photographer for a little while now. I started as an assistant. I did that for 5 years, probably from about the ages of 15 to 20. I then bought my first camera when I was 21, and then from there I just started puttering around, and next thing you know, I'd been doing it for a little while. I'd say 6-7 years properly, 4 years as a freelancer. So I've been puttering around with photography for quite a while now. Today I will be talking a little bit about color theory and getting your photos to where you want them to be. And a bit of that will be about pre-production work, and then some of it will be a bit about post work and smidge on shooting, mainly because it does dictate how far you can take your photos or how good they'll look. But before I do anything, I will talk about this little guy. So this is my friend, the i1 Studio. It is literally a color calibrator. The biggest thing is you need to be at a point where you can make your photos work. And to make them work, the easiest way to do it is just to get them to a point where your screen and the devices that you're looking and capturing them on, whether it be an external monitor, whether you're printing them, you kind of want to have a middle point where you know that white's white, black's black, red's red. So this guy definitely helps that quite a lot. So that's that. Like I'm not going to prattle on too much about like the devices themselves. I'm going to switch to my monitor so you guys can see what I am looking at. I mean, color is color. Like we see it with every single photo. We kind of experience it in different ways. You have two methods really. Subtractive and additive. I didn't want to actually open that link. Apologies, guys. Basically, with CMYK, you're subtracting from black, whereas RGB, you're adding color to get black, basically, or get white, I should say. So it just means that the way that color is displayed in the two means that if you do aim for print, often you should be in a CMYK space. If you are doing anything for digital, being in RGB, it breaks up how much color you can actually get. For what we're going through today, it's not too important, but I think it's kind of an important little difference that's how the two color spectrums get to each other. And it's quite an annoying one because it makes a huge difference in terms of how things then look. The other big thing is you kind of have different ways of kind of adding colors together to make your shots look good. What they call complementary, so colors that go together well, triads, so three colors that fit, tetradeck, which is 4 colors, I'm probably saying that wrong, which is more, you're using smaller space, whereas quadrilateral is from a wider space, so you're moving out from how they work together. To be honest, I think for the most part, you can get away with knowing that shots you like for a certain reason, rather than kind of paying too much attention to that stuff. I do think the biggest thing is then how your various tools then display that color. Yeah, come on. So in our friend here is Capture. Capture is the live tethering software that's kind of an industry standard. Then the background I have Lightroom. How they display color is really, really different. And that really does also dictate how you then use those tools. And I think that's really, really important as well. You kind of have obviously white balance, your tone curve, your color sliders. You have similar sort of tools in capture, but the difference is how you then reach those different spaces. As you can see, as I kind of pull this around, it's going to change the balance of our shots versus how we reach that in our friend Lightroom here, which I think a lot of people do use. It's going to then display really, really differently. Pulling on different things is going to give you a different results, different values. And I think that's really important to understand, because the software you do end up using does end up making a huge amount of difference in terms of how you then adapt those color methods. And I'll play around a bit there, but before I do, I want to step back for a second, and I want to talk about how important referencing is for this stuff. So referencing just means the shots that you choose to use that dictate where you want to take your stuff. And if I pull back to here on my screen, like this, as you can see, is probably a direct flash shot. It's quite neutral. You can see that there's quite a bit of highlights clipping here, because it looks like they've probably shot with an on-camera flash. Then something like this is a gel shot. Probably again, this is a direct. You'll notice the title up here is Tinder. I do a little bit of work for Tinder, which is why I'm kind of using this folder, because I can actually show you the finished shots here, rather than kind of going, oh, you know, here's kind of like a half finished sort of thing, or this is what I thought. I have the unedited files here so that I can kind of play around a bit here and show you what I did, rather than just going, oh, you know, it's kind of all out there in the, you know, as a theoretical thing. I think the practicalities of color is kind of a hard one, because it's personal preference. But I do think the biggest thing that I would say to you guys is just to kind of have a reference point, so that when you're kind of like mucking around with this stuff, you know what you're doing with it. You know where you want to take it, rather than going in post and trying to decide that. One thing I will quickly go back to there as well is like how you adapt to your color settings will really dictate like what this then means. I mean how the shot's taken. So I mean, for example, in a studio setting, something like this. I'm sorry, just getting used to my controls. The big thing you'll see is like these are shot like with ambient lights, or at least with like a soft light. They're quite bright, whereas if there's a lot of shadows, for example, it's going to then say how you then pull, where you're then pulling your color from. So you can be pushing color into your highlights or your shadows or your midtones, depending on what those values are, and how those three color spaces work together can be really complementary. So if you're pushing your reds in like your shadows, for example, then you might be then looking at how you then cut the luminance in the blues and the highlights or something like that. So it does really depend on what you're doing with your photos. So I want to quickly point that out, because it's a hard one to kind of like get around, and it is color is such a fundamental thing to what we're doing. Okay, so the next part that I think is really important is the shots themselves. So this was a headshot we did today at George's for one of our customers, and the big thing is as we kind of pull in the master, you can see it's going to really pull around, and where you want to take this would really be dictated by things like their skin tone, as you can see as we pull down. And the other thing is, you probably don't want to clip too much in your backgrounds, making them a different color. So the master, let's just reset it, boom. And at the moment in the highlight, so maybe we would pull a little bit in the highlights. Obviously we'd probably pull more in the midtones, to be honest. I'm just going to reset it. Let's go midtone. I love shooting film, so I will tend to pull a lot in the midtones, because you can do a lot. And the reason I bring up film is film shots have like your color preset already there. It's baked in by the color that you're actually using. So I do tend to favor my reds and my yellows just because that's the film stocks I tend to like, being Portra, or if I like my cheap stocks like the 200 gold, for example. Ultramax is kind of fun. So those have really nice like mid-tones that are quite golden. So, and I quite like shooting in golden light as well. So I do tend to favor that kind of like tone spectrum. But back to my editing itself. So we could pull in here, but I'm gonna get away from doing too much in capture because I don't think it's something that everyone has, and I do think it's kind of an important one that we use a tool that is kind of the industry standard, which would be our friend here, Photoshop. So here's a retouched photo from my last workshop. Now we've done a little bit. I think this might be color. So I've done our eyes there. I'm just doing a quick pull. Nothing else. I've kind of like clipped out the background a little to make it a little more even. Or extended it because Instagram is that annoying 4x5. So let's delete out these layers. You'll notice I've got this tool here as well. This is from Infinite Color Panels, a quick tool I often use for mucking around with color to kind of like give myself an idea. I mean, gosh, that was really nice straight out of the box. But you have a variety of ways to play with your color balance and color tools, and I'll talk a little bit about each. But basically you have all these different ways to kind of adjust color, especially in Photoshop. And the big thing is like what you do with those tools does then dictate what you can then take, what you can then do with them. In the interest of not using something that everyone has, we're going to start with the color balance tool because it's it's a good one. You've got 3 layers to it. Highlights, shadows, midtones. Now the other thing as well is then, let's say we pull, push, and this is often what I do. I quite like doing, and as you can see, my histogram changed quite a bit there. You can see it's split now. You can see these big clips, and it's telling me it's clipping. Boom, boom, and that's just the midtones. So if we go into shadows, we could do the exact opposite. And as you can see, by pulling the cyans, our background's been cut quite a bit. It's still a lot more golden just because of the way that we've set the shot up. And then let's go into highlights, and we'll just let's go a little more pinks and a little more yellows. We're just pulling away from green and blue. Now you can see it's made quite a bit of difference just to that one shot. You can see that that's been retouched already. So, I mean, this is already been done, but you've got all these different color additive modes. A screen is going to brighten it up, color dodge again. They're just different ways of kind of adjusting your shot. So let's say we want to use soft light, which is going to add to the shot. It's going to brighten. It's going to it's going to darken up a lot of the shot, but it's not going to do too much. And that's quite nice. It's added quite a bit of contrast to the photo already. Sorry guys, just have some of the team passing, but you can see already from there, like you can make quite a bit of difference to your photo. And the other thing to note here as well is because I have left this quite neutral already and the background's white, we're really focusing on her skin tone here. So that's the other thing here. It's like, it depends on your subject as well. It depends on how they look. It depends on what's going on for them. That makes a huge difference. We'll switch back to my screen again. But I just wanted to break it up there for a sec, just to kind of like pause and go, okay, like what we do here makes a huge difference. And again, we're at 100%. And because it has added quite a bit of contrast in the color section, I mean, for example, I might actually just want brightness, contrast. I might I just want to bring it down a little bit so it's not too much. Again, as we do this, you'll watch what happens to my histogram. It's just shifted it up, mainly because I've added brightness by accident. You can watch what happens to your histogram. Your skin tone is probably, she's wearing a white shirt, so that's that peak there. And then I'd say skin tone's more here. It's not, we're not going over that, well, we're not clipping a skin tone too much, I should say. Then, yeah, so I've brought that back a little bit just so it's not too bright. The next thing would be, and I'm just going to check this isn't one of the team quickly. Nope, so just making sure that's not someone saying, hey, the live stream's not working right now. I often use illuminants. So black and white, for example, here, black and white. Now, the big thing is obviously it makes the shot black and white, but you then have the various channels and the various levels of luminance, so the amount of light coming out of each channel, basically. So if I pull down here and then I was to lower the opacity, it's then going to cut that light out. If we then make sure we're not cutting those other channels, so it's really going to be impacting the reds and blues more than anything else. If I turn it right up, you can see the reds and yellows, you should say, are a lot darker, as you can see, than everything else. And often black and white, if you're trying to figure out what to do with a shot, it's going to give you a good indication of where your color is, what layers. So if I grab this tool up here, it's going to tell me what layer I'm really pulling on, where it's, yeah, so it's a lot of red. Same thing with the yellows, you can see, but it's more in her hair, and the highlights here on her arm are more yellow. But yeah, it gives you a good indication of where that color kind of lies without having to really think too much about that. They're kind of, I guess, some fundamental tools within Photoshop that kind of set you up to play around more. I'm going to get a much more intricate photo here, again, from Tinder, because I think their stuff's fairly colorful. And I'm also going to pull up my poor attempt at what do you call, not a land, it's kind of Astro-ish being the keyword. Definitely don't know much about Astro. Sorry, Matt, who runs our Astro workshops. If you are interested in that stuff, I do suggest looking at his Instagram and his stuff. I'll put a link in the description of this video. It's probably it's much better than anything I can do. But okay, let's go into that color folder. Where are you, color? There it is. And let's find one where I have done a lot. I'm just looking for it. I swear I put it on my desktop before. Oh, it's frozen? Oh. Okay, come on. Oh, OBS. Of course, you're frozen again. Stop. All right. Let's see if we have fixed this now. Okay, guys, I am sorry about that. Let's see. Sorry, guys. I am really sorry about that. It's still one of those things I'm trying to manage. Yeah, apologies again for that. Yeah, still figuring this stuff out. Yeah, we'll redo this one shortly. Start from the beginning. Yeah. Sorry, normally there is someone checking, but it's one of those hard parts. So yeah. So where did it freeze? Sorry, honestly the chat froze right at the beginning, and I had no idea. It didn't give me any comments, and the video camera's just cut out, which is annoying, but I'll fix that. Oh. All right, cool. Okay. Sound only. Let's see. Okay, see me now? Cool. And the chat's working. I'm really sorry, guys. The chat must have died. It gave me the first few messages, and then it just didn't give me any feedback, so I thought it was working. So apologies again. Normally I am checking. The chat must have just... okay. So... okay, first before we cut to your monitor. Okay, so I am... When was that, guys? Just so I'm like, I'm not just kind of like... Let's see. Okay, so... froze before it cut to my monitor. Any luck, this will now work with any luck. Alright, we've got these three open. So did we get to the part where I was talking about what the three kind of like pieces of software we're kind of looking at today are? Because that's probably the most important thing for you guys, is to kind of like talk about the three tools that we have at our disposal here. Okay, so the big thing would be is today we're kind of looking at Photoshop, Lightroom, and Capture. They're kind of I guess the three most common tools. Now, Capture is this guy here. Capture is kind of the the live software that a lot of commercial photographers use, and the reason that we use it is because the biggest problem with like Lightroom and I guess the one that most of the like Canon and Nikon bundle with their software is they tend to drop out, like OBS has on us today. And then the other big problem always is like we when it drops out, you're kind of waiting for images as well. So these images tend to lag, and Capture is just a lot quicker than everything else. Capture's interface is quite similar to Lightroom in the sense that the tools are all there in a similar sort of way, but the biggest thing is how you then use them is very, very different. You'll notice and I've got Lightroom in the background here. Lightroom, we very much have your color sliders are laid out like this, whereas with Capture, it's kind of like a 3D tool. So it's gives you this kind of like layout here to play around with, whereas with the tools within Lightroom are very, very much like a sliders. Well, they are sliders, I should say. So that's kind of like I guess, most important. That's kind of the basics of the basic differences between the two. The next thing, obviously, is Photoshop, which is kind of what I would say we'll spend most of our time in today. But I will quickly kind of run through what you can do with Lightroom mainly, just because I think Lightroom is probably what everyone kind of uses. So there's different ways to kind of adjust your color within Lightroom, much like there is with almost any other tool. I'm going to switch from linear mode to, I want the dots, so point curve, not linear. We just want to be able to pull. So as we hit this, we can kind of adjust. And this is going to adjust our whole tone curve. So if we clipped here, and I'm just going to reset this shot first. Well, so let's just pick another one. It's easier. So if we pull this down, you notice our whites then turn to gray. You could pull up here to then, because you can see the peak here, And as we kind of pull, you'll notice her skin then blows out. So that you can really see what's happening there. Dehaze is not really going to do anything. But if we jump into the red layer, for example, you can then see same sort of tone curve. You can see the same spike. Green, same thing. Blue, same thing. But there's slight differences. And that's due to the fact that obviously we're shooting mainly for skin tone here. So that pull is really going to be from the, well, that, I guess the massive spike's really the skin tone. So as we kind of pull down, obviously we're going to see changes, especially for pulling down in this region here. It's turning to yellow because we're pulling away from blue. But yeah, that's kind of what the tone curve really is for. I'm just making sure we can see. All right, so, and apologies again, I'm now just feeling a little off key, just for that little error start, because I kind of was, I feel like I had a good flow, which you guys missed, unfortunately. All right, I'm gonna leave that off actually. Okay. But we'll go into Photoshop, mainly because it's the tool that I'm most comfortable with, and talk about, I guess, what happens when you combine color in different ways. And as you can see, I had started to already adjust this, and I'm going to make sure this hasn't cut out. Yep, someone else making sure that I can see that we've had a few hiccups. So I've already retouched this. We won't go there today. We're really just focusing on what you then do with the color. The first thing you'll notice with a shot like this is it's very white. So any sort of impact we're going to have is really going to be had firstly in, well, you're going to see most of it in the white. So if we start pulling in the darker areas of the shot, because there aren't that many, you can push them quite hard, and they're going to be quite subtle still. Whereas anything that you do to your whites, when there's a lot of white in a photo, it's really going to have a lot of effect across the entire image. So how dark or how light your image is really going to be impacted by how where you put that color. So if our shot's really white and bright like it is in this one here, as you can see, if we start going into the highlights, and we're going to use the color balance tool, and we go into the highlights, and we pull on the reds, it's going to make an impact across the entire area of the image. And now let's reset that back to 0. Let's go into the shadows, and we do the same thing. Boom. And you'll notice this, we've gone even higher here, and the effect it's having on the image is a lot less severe, well, a lot less intense. And that's again, and apologies whilst my words catch up with my brain, is really what's going to happen when you're kind of pulling those areas. So how dark or how bright your shot is, and how much white and how much black is in that photo, is really going to impact what happens to your color when you start pulling from your highlights or your shadows. So just be aware of that first and foremost. And the other big thing I would say is referencing is so crucial for that. Because if you want to create a shot with like really moody red tones, and moody for you is like quite dark, and you shoot a shot that's quite bright, you're not going to be able to pull those reds in those dark areas. Same if you shoot something where, like I'm wearing a blue shirt that's almost black. If I start pulling that, if I start trying to pull red out of that, it's going to be very hard if I start trying to pull that from like a bright blue, for example. If I wanted to clip that with some red, I wouldn't be able to do that because it's too dark. So if I wanted this more red, I'd be pulling from the shadows of the image, not the highlights, because it's a darker tone. And I'm just checking my phone, guys, to make sure you guys can still see me. Boom, boom, boom. And I'm just going to go back to the chat as well and hope it hasn't frozen, because let's make sure that has not. Yeah. And again, guys, apologies for that. It's obviously something that happens. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. Let's go back to my image here. All right, so it looks like live chat's still working. All right, so let's reset that back to 0. And again, I'm just going to show you all I did here was if we will go into the highlights and we pull, like it's going to make an impact on the entire image. Whereas if I go into the shadows and pull that same, it's going to do not all as much. It's really going to be in these darker areas in her hair, as you can see. So if I go off and on. The other thing you'll notice as well is by pulling that, you really get an idea of what else is going on in your shot. You're able to start to see the other colors. Like if you think there's a lot of green in there, for example, you start to see that. The other tool that I think is really important is the black and white. And that might seem strange because we're talking about color theory, but it's really hard to kind of separate out the channels of color and see them. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to really quickly jump in and go black and white. And the thing with black and white is you then have reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magenta. And as we pull, you'll see it makes quite a bit of difference on the entire image if we're pulling from reds. With yellows, you'll see it's probably not making as much difference. It's more in the brighter areas we're seeing more yellow, quite a bit in her hair as well. And that gives us an idea of what's going on in that image. If we start trying to pull greens, you'll notice as we pull all the way to 0, or minus 200 and all the way to 300, you see it's just not making anywhere near as much difference. Blues, same sort of thing. Or cyans, I should say. Blues, we're not seeing that much. You're seeing a little bit of banding in this area because there's a slight bit of blue. And the magentas, again, there's not much in the photo. So it gives us a really good indication of what's going on in our image. And it gives us an idea of where we should be playing. And the other big thing is if we're going to adjust a large area of the shot, like in terms of the hue, it's really going to be from those major areas where there's a lot of that color. We'll pull open another image where there's with a lot of blue, for example, and that'll give you an idea of what that would mean for a blue shot. Again, this is one of my not so great landscape photos, but I think because there's a lot of blue in here, it kind of gives us a good indication. And I might just quickly put those in a separate folder. So you can see this is major blue tones, and they're quite dark blues as well. So let's go back to that black and white. And if we go and hit this slider and we pull, you'll see it's really lots and lots of blue. We're really just pulling those blue tones in and out. It gives us an idea of what area of the photo, what the tonality really is. And it means that we're not having to fight against our images. And I really like Photoshop for that reason, because you can kind of really hone in on certain areas and you don't have to tinker too much. You can kind of just, go straight in there and go, okay, that's what that is. That's what those layers are. That's where we're kind of seeing the most amount of difference. Again, I'm just going to quickly check on the video chat to make sure. Yeah, if it does lag, guys, just let me know. Again, we are hopefully not going to have any more issues. It's then, well, I would say with an image like this, one of the things I then do is, okay, so it's the blues are quite dark. Now, color balance is a great tool. I use this a lot. Now, you have the ability to kind of like drag your shot in a certain direction. Now, as you can see, as I pull my blues in, what happens to my HSL, it kind of spreads out a bit more because I'm pushing more into the shot, so my blues are really pushed. Same with the cyans, as you can see, there's still quite a bit of red in the shot in the clouds, and I'm just making sure that. Fletcher has just called me. I'm just making sure you guys are not losing me again. No. Okay. Boom. So let's say we quite like the idea of pulling lots of blues. We're in the mid-tones as well. So again, as I said, when there's a lot of area that's quite dark, as you can see from our HSL slider here, well, our histogram, I should say, it's showing us that it's quite dark because all the colors are in the lower half of the lower region of the image. So with the way you can add color, we can add you can add the layers in a variety of different ways. So with color balance, you can see if I multiply, like these are kind of your darkening options in this section. This is going to brighten up your image. Overlay is going to add these kind of overlay options are going to add to it, and difference, these are removing it from your image, which can mean, depending on what color spectrum you're playing with, it can remove, it can add, it really depends what you're doing. As you can see, if I'm using exclusion, it's brightening it up quite a lot, but in this case, we're going to use the brightening sort of options, and I'm going to use color, well, I'm going to use screen in the lighting section of the additives to Photoshop. And the reason I'm using screen is kind of, is the way it adds to it is quite nice, and it means like I'm brightening up the image quite a lot. As you can see, it's a huge difference. But if we did the same thing with the reds, you'll find that it's not going to brighten up anywhere near as much, just because there's not as much red in the image, and any reds and yellows would be in the clouds themselves. But I'll take a step back from there and just explain one of the things with that is, before we even get into that section of the editing, I would say one of the most important things to do is reference. And I do think that's something that's really important, because if you shoot an image that's quite bright and you wanted really dark, bright reds in your shadows, but there's no shadows, there's not really enough reds to pull from. So it makes it quite difficult to then I guess manage that or make those sort of changes. Again, still checking, guys. So the next step would be, well, the step back from that would be to reference and make sure that the references that you're using really suit the kind of shots that you're kind of working on. And it kind of gives you an idea of where you're then going to take things, rather than kind of going, oh crap, I'm going to throw something out there and then after the fact try and figure it out. And that can work if you've been doing it a while and you kind of know what you want. But if you're experimenting, I often say having a reference point, even if it's just a launch pad, it's like, I really like the pinks in these photos, and then you realize you want more red instead. You can go, okay, well, we can still shoot that in a similar way, but I'm going to pull more reds rather than pinks. And that just means that you're not kind of then stuck trying to figure that out. Okay, so color, let's go on my desktop, refs. And the client that I'm kind of going to be pulling from and showing some images from is Tinder. I do some work for I do some ads for them. And it's kind of nice to actually use a finished product rather than going and trying to figure out what we were aiming for. And there's a few shots in here I'm just looking for in particular that have, sorry, I had this open and then I closed it. So, and apologies, these are quite small, but we'll just bring them up. So you'll see there's quite a lot of red in this shot. Skin tone's quite neutral. There's a lot of color. That's really what it was really about. Reds. In this one, it's quite neutral. It's clipped. When I say clipped, like the whites are really bright. There's a lot of contrast. It feels like the whites aren't true whites. They're just beneath, and as you can see, even the white there might be about a tone off being completely 100% white, which means they've probably brought the whites down just a little bit in post. Yeah, a lot of color was really the aim of this. So that being the case, you know, Tinder being a red brand, that's really important. So let's now go into these shots themselves where there is quite a bit of color. Just to kind of show that. And you'll see the color's been edited in quite a few different ways. Again, it really depends what you're doing. I use infinite color quite a bit. Infinite, and I'll show you that in a second. It pulls color in a variety of different ways, and it's a good way to experiment and figure it out. But let's just remove all color, just so you can see what the original was like. So I've shot this using some colored lights, and that's another big thing with color theory is like knowing where you want to take your shot beforehand really does help. You can always add color in post, but the one thing I'll say as well is having an idea of what your base shot looks like and why you want it there. And I'll bring up that ref again to kind of just highlight the fact that that was really kind of like where we were kind of like, we really loved these sorts of colors. And you can kind of see when I move some of these windows around. Close that one, close that one. Just open that image back up. You can kind of see I've had similar sort of colors kind of pulled from there just to kind of like get there. But the big thing I want to highlight as well is there's quite a bit of post work that obviously goes into that to kind of get it to where you want it to be. And it's really that area that I want to highlight today. But I just want to say that there's a lot to think about in terms of how you set up your shot. And I would say the biggest thing is just focus on how bright your image is. If it's bright and you want to pull reds in your shadows, then make sure you have some shadows there to pull from. Having some darker colors to break it up really, really helps. Okay, so again, we'll go in and we'll kind of look at, let's turn this off first. Let's look at the histogram. So our histogram says it's quite dark, and then there's one pop of color right at the top there. And that pop of color is really going to be our clean shoes down here. When we start pulling, you'll notice the first thing I've done, and I'm just going to, let's start with a new one, just so we're on the same page. You notice 40, 60, 40, 60, 20, 80. So this is kind of the default in Photoshop. We turn it off and on. You'll find that, as you can see, it's quite flat right now. It's just not capturing it, like the reds are blown out. And if I want to figure out like, oh, where's my color? As you can see, that's overexposed. I'd be looking, okay, this tool up here, this little hand, which I know has a name, but I am forgetting what it's called. I think it's just a color, like color slider picker. As I kind of pull down, you'll see I'm then able to then see I'm no longer clipped, my highlights are no longer clipped. But obviously then you don't necessarily want your image black and white. The good thing with a tool like this is we're not necessarily going by selective channel, but if we are then going by opacity, the areas that we're kind of pulling from more, pushing down more, are going to affect the luminance more. So really what we're looking at creating is a luminance filter. And luminance, just to get the technical definition up, because I think it's kind of important one to kind of talk about a little bit more, and I'm going to use that definition. I had this window up before, but I did close it. Is the light intensity from a surface area. So we're looking at the red luminance here, and the surface area of the reds and how bright they are. And by pulling them back, we're then no longer clipping them. The good thing with this is we can kind of, with black and white, we can kind of prevent clipping in all different areas. So as I pull down in the reds, and as you'll see, when we start to pull down too far, then it then starts to get to the stage where it is black and white. But the big thing with this tool and with black and white in Photoshop is it gives you the ability to kind of then pull back create some darker areas in terms of color space, and then the other important thing, add back to it. So I'm then jumping in the tone curves. We'll again reset this. These tools all add to each other, and that's the other really important thing. So as I kind of pull this up, you'll see what happens is we get this gap because we no longer have any blacks, no true black, I should say. And that can be good. It does really depend on the look you're going for. That's one of the most important things. But the other thing then is how we then, okay, I don't know, my wacom is not connected. Come on. Don't crash. All right, give it a second. Apparently it's going to have a hissy fit. Probably Photoshop is, no, it's not Photoshop, it's just whatever this window is above it is now being but we'll get rid of it. Just give me 1 second. Have not had that warning before. Okay. All the technical difficulties tonight. Alright. Let's see, memory, let's search for Wacom, and let's just force quit. Force quit. Force quit. Yep, there we go. We've gotten rid of that window. Well, and we'll just double check on you guys as well, make sure that this is working still. Thanks, that. Okay, awesome. Let's make sure. All right. Back in Photoshop. I'm going to turn all these off first. So I'm going to quickly talk about one of my favorite tools. It's I think like 100 US. It's just called Infinite Color Panel. We don't get any money from them or anything. I just think it's a neat tool to kind of like muck around a bit. The biggest thing I always struggle with color is figuring out where to take things. And even if I have reference points, often I'm like, I don't know. I feel like this could use something else, or how do I then add or change or subtract? And this is a great way to just kind of like jump in and figure it out, or let someone else figure it out. So down here, I've just got this, and as you literally can hit the create button and it'll just shuffle through a bunch of different ones. But the big thing I'm going to show is what you can then do with each of these. So I'm going to start with tone curve. So tone curve is just, they're all different ways of kind of playing with color within your shot. Now, the big thing with playing with color within photos, obviously, is you can kind of take it anywhere, which again, back to referencing, reference, it does help heaps. The way that then you can then add, so if we pull the reds down, for example, we're taking the red out because we're kind of going, okay, less red, more red. So brighter, less red, more red. Now, the fact there's a lot of red in this shot means that if we do, again, use our select tool and we pull down, let's just reset, so we'll just camera. Let's just make sure that's going to be less stubborn. Color slider, check. Okay, so as I roll over this image, you can see, okay, the reds in the tone curve are up here as I go down her face. It's brightest, obviously this is kind of the brightest point in the photo except for the ceiling. Even the ceiling is a little darker except for that point up there probably. Again, bright, a little darker. It kind of allows us to figure out where to pull from. So let's take that one out. Let's say we want to just darken a little bit. Boom. You can see that then we've selected from that particular area of red and pull them down. If you want those areas brighter, we do the opposite. As you can see, there's quite a bit of red in this photo, so if we pull the reds up, it's then brighter. But you obviously then, each color is then going to have an effect on the other ones. Like as we pull the reds up, you'll notice the histogram changes up here, which affects the whole shot. So they need to play with each other. So I'd say playing around with the histogram is one of the easiest. The tone curve here is one of the best ways to kind of like give your shots a lot of mood. The other thing as well is if we then decide to go really, really extreme with this, which I tend to do, I tend to overdo it. So let's say this, and then we clip. So clipping, meaning I'm pulling it up so the blacks are no longer black, they're more gray, and then clip here. And you'll notice if I turn this off and on, what happened to my histogram, it's very, very, very flat. And obviously it doesn't look great. But if I want that to be quite a subtle effect, I can then use the opacity or the fill. Opacity just meaning whole shot. You'll see it's going to flatten in a much more subtle ways. So again, you can go extreme and then turn it down. And then the reason I'm kind of highlighting that is I tend to do that a lot. It makes things easier. Rather than kind of like going and being like, oh crap, like camera's turned off. I'm just going to turn that back on. Just 1 second, I'm going to switch. There we go. Camera is on. And the Wacom message is back saying it is not liking me for some reason. One of those that is tonight. Seems that whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And guys, if there's any questions in particular about this as well you want to ask, just go for it. I don't really have an agenda. And thanks Ross. The main aim is I want you guys to kind of get an idea or a grasp around how this stuff kind of works. Because color is like a really difficult area because it's just, there's so much you can kind of do with it, and there's so much that can go wrong. The other thing that's quite important is how you kind of add and subtract, and again, how you reference and what you're kind of looking for. I tend to find that designers are really, really good at it, and it's because they've kind of had a lot of practice with color theory, and they've really thought about. With photography, it's quite an interesting one because often it's something you kind of like, you realize afterwards that, like there's something wrong with my shot, or I'm not feeling like this is kind of where I want it to be. And one of the things I will say is it's usually where we're focusing is on skin tone. And it's because, you know, when you pull images out of a camera, often your JPEGs look quite nice, but because your RAW files are quite expanded, they often look very, very, very flat, almost gray. And that gray tone is, it's a lot of room and a lot of dynamic range to play with, but it's generally speaking not really what you're after. Okay, let's kill this tool. That's out of my way. That's whatever reason this. My Wacom is not plugged in, so I do not know why I am getting crash warnings for it right now. Okay, disappeared again. Good. Boom, boom, boom. Make sure this is still. So, let's say these first two layers we're really happy with. We like the fact in the curves, we've kind of pushed it. Now, color balance, let's say we want more blues. Now, you'll notice there's still quite a lot of blue in the background of the shot. And that's an important one to note. I'm going to quickly jump on my own website. Because I have written on this before as well. And I think it's often easier to reference myself than it is to reference someone else. Yeah. I think. Especially this one. So, yep, sweet. I do have that up. So, firstly, let's look at our subjects in the front here. We've used a lot of red and yellow, but in the background there's a lot of blues. If we were to kind of break it down a little bit, we could kind of go plonk. Let's just fill let's go make sure this is on top so it's not being affected by the other colors. Red. So that's a dominant shot color in the shot. Obviously the yellows are, so plonk. So all I'm doing now. Now the other thing is, so I'm just using the eyedropper tool. You'll see the one thing as well is like, because this color is quite dark, but we can see what it's where in the blues it's kind of pulling. So that's a really important one to note, because often your color will be quite dark, but you can kind of get an idea from this where it can kind of sit. So, and the other thing is your eyes are going to kind of give you that as well. So let's say that we want that blue, and then finally, I'd say the final thing is it's probably black, because there's a lot of black in the shot as well. So yeah. Again, it's almost blue again. I'm just, for sanity's sake, going to go put this up here. And you guys, I'm sure, have seen color swatches as well before, and that gives you an idea of what's the predominant amount of colors in the shot. And the reason I bring this up, because it gives you an idea of what the predominant mood is and where it's kind of coming from. So that blue as well, that blue is not, we're not really seeing it too much at the moment because it's so dark. So as I don't think I explained this before because I think I got cut off, and apologies again, guys. But let's go, and we're gonna go curves. Now, we're gonna go into blue. And as I said, this is quite dark. So if we start pulling it up, it's gonna pull up everywhere in the shot, as you can see. And you can see if I turn this off and on, what's happening to my histogram. It's in the midsection, because we've pulled those blues up so much that it's really bouncing up quite a lot. I might just pull this along, so make this a little bit. Can I get it to make? I'm trying to make it bigger, but I think I'm going to struggle here. I'm just going to leave it alone, because otherwise I'll probably end up closing it. In fact, what I'll do, I'll zoom in. So if you look, when I turn it off and on, I'll just zoom out slightly. Slightly more. Can I keep it in the shot and at the same time? There we go. So off and on. It's made quite a lot of difference because we're pulling those blues up especially. Now, I don't necessarily want to pull everything, for example. So you have all these different options in terms of adding. So I am going to pick lighter. Well, I'm going to pick screen, to be honest. Screen is, there are basically all dodging options. Someone is saying, is it dropped again? Took it wrong. Sorry, guys. Just making sure that's still going. You guys just let me know if it is before I continue. I don't want to leave you in the lurch. I'm just going to wait a second because I just want to check. Awesome. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, so you can see it's probably blown out the rest of the shot way too much. But the good thing is you have your mask options. So a mask is just literally just So mask is just the parts of the shot that are blocked out. So you probably saw that red that was appearing before when I was doing that. So that's just the mask showing up to show me what's going on, because otherwise it's kind of like you're often unaware of where you're painting. I have a relative idea of where this is landing, so it's not too bad. We're also pulling the opacity down as well, but you can see that blue is now closer to that. So you can almost see a bit of green in there. But that's the thing as well, is if you decide that that's what you want to pull up, it's really important to kind of like look at that and focus in on those areas of color and really highlight that. So I'm going to go back to one of my references quickly, my own stuff. And again, mood boards and referencing are really, really, really important. And I've kind of picked some references from, what is his name? George's Anthony. Because he's a Australian fashion photographer, and his work is really, really beautiful. But you can see how these four colors are kind of like playing together really, 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 really nicely. So you've got these blues, these grays, you've still got the browns that are almost in her skin tone because they're quite dark. And then you've got this chain which is quite dark, so that's almost black. And again, whilst there's not much red in this shot, her boots are because of that, they stand out. And I mean, she does almost match the color of the sky, but it's quite a nice difference there. But a lot of this stuff also would happen again in post, and again, that's why I'm kind of like playing around a bunch in Photoshop, because obviously some colors are going to be brighter than others. So they're also going to pick up more light. The brighter an object is, the more light it's going to reflect back at you. So often in post, you do have to kind of accommodate for that. And that's a really, really, really important thing to kind of do. I won't keep you too much longer tonight, guys. But we will run through one more image. I think we kind of missed this one because it died. And apologies again. This is one I did spend a bit of time explaining. So we're gonna do two. So we're gonna do one landscape shot which has a lot of blue in it, and then one shot that has a lot of yellow and red in it, just to kind of like really talk about how that highlight control really, really happens. Now, as I was saying before, skin tone is probably the most important thing for almost everyone, and it can be a really hard thing to master because it's one, everyone's skin is different. Two, it's often really hard to kind of like figure out what area to kind of pull from. The other big thing is if you shoot your skin tones and they're quite underexposed, or the person has quite dark skin, it's a much different process to shooting someone who's quite pale like myself, because you're really focusing on the highlights, whereas someone who has quite dark skin, often you're playing with the shadows almost because their skin tone's closer to the blacks versus, for example, mine's closer to the whites. And I mean, that should make perfect sense because it makes it, it's like the darker your skin is, the closer it is to black, the whiter your skin is, the closer it is to white. And that will mean how you then interpret that with in your post work is really going to be affected by that. Okay, so again, we are quickly going to use one of these images from my workshop. And again, back to the color balance tool, we're actually going to reset. So this is unedited. Well, this has been retouched, but there's no color done to it. So we're going to quickly go color balance. Again, just checking that we are all good in the background there. Cool. Looking like it's working. All right. So again, quite bright. You'll notice I have tried to make sure I haven't overexposed this photo, but we are pretty close to being overexposed. I did meter it. Meters can be really, really, really useful for that reason, especially if you're trying to get accurate exposure and you're looking at the luminance of the person you're shooting. Often it's not going to give you. It can be quite hard, especially if someone's quite pale like myself, to get that accurate luminance. So we've opened the color balance tool. Now there's a mask on it, which is the default, and then the layer itself. So we're going to just start by going in, and we're going to go and play with the shadows just to show you how little difference it's going to make. Now it's still going to make a bit of difference, and if I zoom out, we'll see, and we'll turn it off. One, go off. 1, 2, 3. We get it nice and close again, and turn it on. It's probably quite subtle. Again, because there's not that many shadows, the image is quite bright. Now we're going to reset that back to 0. So again, we're playing with the shadows. Now if we do the exact same thing, now what were we at? We were at 58. So let's go 58 in the highlights. Huge difference. Much more going on. So that's one of the most important things, knowing how bright and how dark your image is. And you can see, with the histogram, the biggest thing is it's kind of clipped at the top there. There's now like this clip right at the end, especially for those whites. They're now too bright. Okay, so with a bright image like that, the big thing I'm trying to highlight is you're almost better off playing with the shadows or the midtones if you're trying to make a subtle difference, because as you can see, the highlights is going to be quite dramatic. So we'll go back and we'll kind of hone in a little bit more. Again, we'll go to the black and white tool, which is my favorite. And you'll see, and as you can see, when I pull the black and white in, it's clipped. You can see there's almost no detail there because it's just so bright. So if I grab the color selection tool and I pull down, you'll see that I want it to come down. You'll see it's really pulling down in just the reds. There's heaps and heaps of reds in this image. Still quite a bit of yellows, but they're kind of in that mid-tone area here. They're not too much in the highlights. So they're not making as much difference. If I play around with these other areas, the cyans, the blues, the magentas, it makes very little difference. Means that if I want to adjust the luminance, I can quite quickly pull down and create a lot of contrast, a lot of mood, without having to work too hard. And I'm just going to go back into the highlights here, and I'm going to pull that. So that's just turning those off. As you can see, we're minus 83, minus 5. You can see it's really neutralizing out a bit. We're clipping quite a bit. It's making the image quite a lot moodier, and it is quite a bit duller. But that's also where we'd go back in and go, okay, like we can compensate. And this is the thing, all these tools add together. So I'd go in, we're in the mid-tones. I think lots of yellows and reds. Same thing, reds and yellows. Yeah, it's quite golden now, way too much, but we can quickly adjust the opacity here. 33, and we're at 33 as well, so probably 22. And all of a sudden, there's a lot more contrast in this image. Her skin tone almost has more feeling to it because it's brighter. Again, we've clipped the luminance a bit in the reds and yellows especially, just to kind of create a bit more tone. Because by doing that, when we're pulling them down, what we're really doing, guys, is we're kind of allowing ourselves a little more, we're pulling them apart almost, because as we pull them down, it's kind of like lengthening it out in the blacks because they're so bright. It's like, okay, you can kind of stretch out a lot of your colors so they have a bit, and the more you stretch them out, the less contrast across that spectrum, but the more tone at the same time. And then you can, again, by adding the reds and yellows back into the image in the color balance, we're then highlighting the fact there's a lot of color range in there. All right. But to a really dark image, and again, we'll finish on this one so that I'm not killing you with too much information. Okay, so there's a lot of blue. I mean, we can see that. So let's go black and white. And we're going to grab the color selector tool. and we'll just pull, and as you can see, my blues are coming all the way up to 157. Let's zoom in here so you can see. I'm just going to pull down, pull up, pull down, pull up. So you can see we're pulling a lot in the blues. I'm sure we'll get quite a bit of cyan, but not too much, mainly in the middle there. So the cyan's really in the middle of this lens, right in there. And then the thing is, we're still getting yellows, and they're in the clouds. So we can kind of see what's going on just by playing around with the histogram, well, the black and white in the luminance. I'm looking at the luminance of the whole image. So I quite like this being a little bit, just lengthening out those blues a bit by bringing it up. And then we'll go back to the color balance tool. Now we're in the midtones. Obviously, it's a really dark blue. So if we push this, you'll notice it's brightened it up a bit. It's now very, very, very blue. So in Photoshop, you have different ways of adding your filters, or adding your layers, you should say. So this will darken. This will lighten in a variety of ways. This will overlay. So it'll add to the shot. And this is the difference between the two layers. But in this case, we want to use, I like screen. Screen's cool because it lightens, but it's almost like the way it's burning out is giving us a lot more leg room to kind of play with. Now you can see it's way, way, way too much. But the big thing as well is if I start playing with the opacity, how much of that is applied is really what is important. So I'm going to go for probably like 55. But again, because then there's so much more blue in the shot, it's almost worth then going and bringing that black and white up just so it's not too blue. Or the other option would be is because this mask, we could then take out some of the blues in some areas of the image just to kind of give it a little bit more. Again, that might be too much, but you can kind of play around with how far you can kind of take it. Masking's a good way to kind of like, if there's a certain part of your image you're trying to brighten up and you've got a lot of red, but you want to pull some reds back, it's quite an easy way. You can paint it in. There's things like just quickly selective color, for example. So if I go up to filter, select color range. So back to the color picker tool. As you can see, fuzziness, I want more. It's going to select more. Okay, that's too much. Boom. But boom, that gives me that color range there, and it's been selected. And as you can see, but I want to subtract that. No, it's the area I want less. I'm going to brighten everything but the clouds, and the edges are a little meh, so I'm just going to feather them a bit so the clouds aren't too much. That gives you kind of like an idea of where that is. Sorry, I'm just making sure you guys are still connected. But you can kind of play around with a lot in a short amount of time. The biggest thing I'll say is in Photoshop, there are so many ways to add color and take it away. It's really, really important to kind of have a starting point. And I think that also helps because when you start to edit and start to get more and more into it, it allows you to then figure out what you really want to do. And I mean, the other thing, again, if you jump into Lightroom, for example, and you really want to, you like Lightroom as a tool, you can see, if you pull the saturation out, you can see where the saturation really is. Like we've pulled it out in just the reds, orange, and yellows, for example, and it's obviously, the image is almost black and white, and we haven't made it black and white. And when I was talking about luminance before with the black and white tool, if you're doing it in Lightroom here, you'd be just using the luminance here. So it's going to give you a similar sort of option in terms of being able to push and pull. And it's similar to what I was doing with the black and white here. But I just prefer Photoshop because there are so many different ways. I can mask a lot more. I can take it a lot further than I can otherwise. And I quite like the wheel in Capture, just because I can adjust the midtones and I can see it in this kind of three-dimensional way versus in 2D, which can be a little painful sometimes. Because as you can see, like as we drag towards one, we're coming away from the others. And in a slider form, it can be quite hard to figure out which color you're pulling away from. It's often good to have like a color slider up, just so you can kind of see like where you're kind of pulling from. So if you're pulling oranges, you're often pulling away from the blues, and vice versa. Same with your greens if you're pulling from red. And that wheel gives us an idea, green to pink, etc., etc. But it's often hard to see how those kind of colors all relate if you're looking at an image in a two-dimensional view here. It's why the histogram can be really, really, really useful, especially if you have that open and we're down here. You can really start to see, especially this one being a color one, you can see as we pull down the oranges, what's happening. As we push up, you can see the reds kind of, and you can see clipping on a nose happening, and that can be really, really, really important. But back to referencing just one last time, it's really important to kind of have a starting point. I do think that will, it's easier to critique your own work. It's easier to know where to take it. It's easier to know it's like what's going on. And that camera's just died, so I'll bring the screen back up every 30 minutes apparently, or even less. Okay. Oh, sorry about the mic there. I'll just caught myself up. 1, 2, 3. Close. Bonk. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Cool. Sounds like that's working again. Okay. Sorry, I just disconnected myself when I went to turn the camera back on. Come on, one last time. I get it. We are short on battery there. I'll be back in 1 second, guys. One right here. Did put one aside just in case. Get that in, on. Cool. All right, should be back. Okay. All right, if there's any questions, guys, let me know. Otherwise, I will let you go, and apologies again for that. I can't believe both things froze. Again, I'm still getting used to this. Yeah. I'll give you guys 2 minutes if you have any questions. All right, well, I'll let you guys go there so you're not waiting too long for me to, well, boring you to death. Anyway, have a good evening.